Hello and welcome to another episode of the Awarelogue Alert, where we look at some of the most burning issues in the world or mark anniversaries, significant dates, personalities, and events that are taking place around the world. Our focus today is on Ukraine. We've been hearing a lot about what has been going on in the vicinity of Ukraine. We've been hearing different statements coming out from world capitals, including a flurry of international visitors to the Ukrainian capital and surrounding areas. In order to discuss Ukraine and take up this matter that much further and help us understand what exactly is happening in Ukraine, we've had the pleasure of inviting Dr. Sergii Glebov, who is an associate professor and deputy dean of the Faculty of International Relations, Political Science and Sociology at the Odessa I, Mechnikov National University in Ukraine. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us and for taking time to speak to us on this extremely crucial time in Ukraine. As a Ukrainian academic, the country is facing a very trying, difficult, and probably risky moment. And that is where we're very keen that we were able to reach out to an academic in Ukraine and speak to you about the situation, how it is evolving. Firstly, could you give us an overview of the situation concerning Ukraine?
Thank you, George, for inviting me to take part at your program, and best from Odessa, Ukraine, to all Sri Lankan people who are watching us and who are concerned about the situation in Ukraine and around Ukraine. Today, the situation looks not that positive in terms of resolving all the problematic issues and corners which have appeared 7 years ago, even earlier. One should not forget that Ukraine is suffering a hybrid aggression from the Russian Federation since 2014. And unfortunately, the proxy war which Russia wages against Ukraine since so-called and attempted annexation of Crimea is extremely tough, not only for Ukraine, but also for the rest of the world. This is because of Ukraine, the collective West, which consists of the United States, NATO, the European Union, our friends all over the world, including Japan, for example, and many other countries, do support Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia. What made Russia aggressive once again in the Cold War times against the West. And unfortunately, because of Ukraine and because of the so-called Russian concerns vis-a-vis NATO, the world is approaching the global crisis, which has limited chances to be resolved peacefully. At least this is what we're talking about today when we are trying to estimate the successfulness of all the diplomatic efforts which are being taken in many European and world capitals.
In terms of the current status, Dr. Glebov, where would you say Ukraine is at this very moment?
So at this very moment, we are considering the possible escalation of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And as you know, the world is trying to understand whether Putin is going to continue his pressure on Ukraine or not, whether Putin is willing to openly invade Ukraine by his army, navy, or not. We do know the diplomatic battle around Ukraine, which Russia is trying to, share with France, Germany, the United States, NATO in particularly, as to possible resolution of the so-called Russian concerns. We're well aware about the so-called red lines which Russia stressed out and pointed out in front of the Western society. Frankly speaking, they're not doable at all. And it looks like this is a good chance for the Russian Federation to step into Ukraine openly and clearly as the Russian state in order to blame the NATO and the US in particularly in their weakness to meet Russian, as they say, actually normal demands, understandable demands of the Russian security concerns. It's not good for Ukraine at any point because whether it's NATO or bad Americans, but it will be Ukrainians, there will be Ukrainians who will be suffering from the direct air or navy strike which Russia can initiate these days.
Professor, you mentioned NATO. Now, Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but Ukraine does have connectivity with NATO. If I'm not mistaken, a couple of years ago, Ukraine became an enhanced opportunity partner in their interoperability program. Now, has all of this connectivity with NATO, has it been a blessing or has it also been an issue that has created some of the tension that exists at the moment? Have you had any assistance coming forward in terms of this relationship?
So the issue of NATO in relations between Ukraine and the Russian Federation, between the Russian Federation and NATO, between the Russian Federation and the US, is a very long and well-known story, which traces back to the late 90s, when Russia seemed to be more or less okay with the cooperation with NATO, and Ukraine did stress its interest in the so-called European and Euro-Atlantic integration. And for that particular issue, it was not a surprise that Russia, from the very beginning, was not that happy with the activities around Ukraine vis-a-vis NATO, and Russia openly stated in a number of its own official foreign policy documents that Russia is against the so-called NATO eastward enlargement and is not happy if Ukraine and Georgia would become the NATO members somewhere in the future. That was pretty much understandable and clear from the very beginning, and there is no any secret. The other thing is that Putin's regime is artificially speculating on the potential of Ukraine to be part of NATO, even in the long-term perspective. One should not forget that one of the explanations of the Russian so-called attempted annexation of Crimea back in 2014 was a message which Putin sent to the rest of the world, saying that if it was not us in Crimea in 2014, there would be NATO bases in Ukraine somewhere in the future. What is nonsense, because there were no any signals from neither NATO nor Ukraine about stationing any so-called NATO bases in Crimea. Actually, there are no NATO army, there are no NATO bases. There are armies of NATO allies which are deciding concerning their own national interests, whether they do want to be present outside their borders or not. So I do believe, and it's pretty much clear that the so-called speculation around NATO's threat towards Russia was basically directed to the internal, circle of people who support Russia inside the Russian Federation and outside of the Russian Federation. So what actually Putin achieved by speculating on the NATO card is that NATO did mobilize itself for the last 7 years. The unity inside inside NATO is pretty much high. Unfortunately, today we may see and may trace some cautious steps from the side of Germany, for example, to be involved into confrontation between NATO and Russia, what is actually a big topic, a big deal in Ukraine at the moment. And we know recent steps and signals from the side of Germany that they are not willing to be participated actively in resolving so-called Ukrainian crisis. We just had the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Germany in Kiev, and his diplomatic activity was not well accepted by the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, who had no chance to meet in person with the German head of the external institution, just because Germany didn't want to be involved with their weapons into this situation. We do understand that Germany is trying to defend their own interests inside this particular crisis. It's quite understandable. Germans do not want to go into war, and that is also reliable explanation. At the same time, Germans do need to be active in applying additional diplomatic efforts to convince Russia not to invade, not to escalate. And we know that on a map, there is a destiny of the Northern Stream 2 project, what is also a political and even geopolitical issue. So we're moving now into the sphere of bilateral relations of Russia with the rest European countries, particularly Germany. Coming back to the issue of NATO, fortunately, Ukraine do pursue its constitutional aim strategy to be part of the European Union and NATO even after 2014. Ukraine is very firm in its understanding of its future inside the Euro-Atlantic zone of responsibility, and is trying to do its best to get closer to the NATO countries in terms of political and military standards, level of democracy, all that said of the important requirements to be part of NATO somewhere in the future. NATO is fully and totally support Ukrainian territorial integrity, Ukrainian sovereignty. NATO calls Russia to give up their interests in the eastern part of Ukraine, up to the issue of resolving the future status of the temporarily occupied territory of Crimea. Unfortunately, Crimean issues is a little bit away from the table and from the agenda at the moment, because the most important thing right now is to convince Russia not to initiate any strike against Ukraine. And the most alarming things at the moment are that the Russian Navy, including the amphibious assault ships, are entering the Black Sea from the Mediterranean Sea, and they will approach also the coast of Ukraine, not far away from Odessa. And as soon as we're staying here and living here in Odessa, it's a big deal for people who live here, because the front may be open just by our doors.
Exactly. We've also seen a flurry of international visitors coming into Ukraine, but also a lot of phone calls. In addition, we've also seen troop deployment. How have these visits had an impact on the situation in Ukraine?
So we have already mentioned the visit of the foreign minister of Germany to Ukraine. We have been witnessing a lot of diplomatic activity for the last 2-3 months Many events are being held both in Kiev and in Moscow. So we do understand that Ukraine needs a strong international support, and unfortunately, Ukraine is not able to defend its national interests just by itself vis-a-vis Russia. We do need someone who would support Ukraine also diplomatically and militarily, in terms to not to let Russia to go forward, to move forward. And we have already mentioned that the German diplomacy is quite tricky, and for the last couple of days we have been witnessing some critique which goes outside from the German allies inside the European Union and NATO. Some politicians around the world which do understand the role of Germany in the world politics do criticize Berlin for its weakness in defending not only just Ukrainian interests, but also in defending the interest of the Western allies. And that is kind of a problem which, first of all, Western allies should decide by themselves, even a part of the situation in this part of the world, in the Eastern Europe. So it's a big deal. We have been witnessing the active role of France, and so we do have first results of the French President Emmanuel Macron visit to Moscow, which was a little bit different from what Ukraine actually anticipated from the side of the French president. There are a lot of different estimations and evaluations. How did it went, the meeting itself, what could be the preliminary and strategic results of that kind of a visit. Emmanuel Macron said that the next few days would be kind of a decisive and would be something which will influence the position of Russia, whether to escalate or de-escalate situation around Ukraine. It's very important to have the common vision of all parts involved into what should be done next. One of the weakest on the one hand and one of the strongest on the other hand factor of the whole situation at the moment is the fulfillment of the so-called Minsk agreements. And this is a big cornerstone which can't both Russia and Ukraine, as well as their partners in Normandy 4, to proceed toward the peaceful resolution of the potential, threats to the regional and even global peace. Ukraine blames Russia that Russia does not correspond to their requirements inside the Minsk framework. Russia blames Ukraine that it's not us, but Ukraine does not follow their, obligations inside the Minsk agreement. It looks like the Western allies are trying to convince Ukraine to give up their principal positions and continue doing what Moscow wants from the side of Ukraine. There is a slight shift from the so-called pro-Ukrainian interest in the Minsk agreement framework toward the Russian interest in this frame of agreements. What make what makes actually Ukrainian experts worry about, because in the Minsk agreements there are a lot of positions which do not correspond to Ukrainian interest at the moment almost completely. But Moscow insists, Putin insists, and the main fear is that even if Ukraine and Russia agree upon the fulfillment of the Minsk agreement, we are facing a threat of having the western parts of Ukraine, which are outside of the Ukrainian sovereign control, to be implemented into the Ukrainian state as a unique autonomous region of Ukraine, which will have their veto on the internal and external decision of the whole Ukrainian state, which would definitely may be tremendously destructive to the strategic goal of Ukraine to be part of the European Union and NATO in the future. So any further steps towards the NATO countries and the US in general as a foreign institution may come under a threat of a direct veto from the side of that particular part of Ukraine, what actually plays on the interests of the Russian Federation. So, concluding this part of the talk, I would like to stress out that there is no any solution at the moment. The world is trying to find some peaceful diplomatic resolvement of the particular situation and crisis, but it looks like all the parties are far away from a diplomatic resolution of the situation. It looks like the ball is in the hands of Kremlin at the moment. The only thing which may convince Kremlin not to move forward is the estimation of possible losses from the side of the Russian Federation, both military, diplomatic, economic. The European countries, the United States, are pretty much consolidated and firm in their willingness and their readiness to implement all the possible economic sanctions in order to make Russia not just weak, but to make it that kind of an actor which would definitely lose much more than just having some tactical, benefits from the invasion into Ukraine.
Dr. Glebov, you mentioned several countries that are involved, but one thing that we always keep coming back to is the fact that Ukraine has the longest border with the Russian Federation. Now, there have been ups and downs in this relationship, and irrespective of what support comes from which corner in the world, Ukraine and Russia are going to remain neighbors. What efforts can be made? Do we return to the Minsk agreements? But then there too, you said there are certain shortfalls, disadvantages, things which are inhibiting the relationship from growing forward. What more do you think should be done to build confidence between the two countries, either from within the two capitals or by external parties? Because whether we like it or not, we don't want to return to another Cold War scenario. We don't want to have another division of the world. We don't want to have the outbreak of a third world war. What more can be done in terms of confidence building measures at this particular time?
So from the very beginning, we should work much harder on eliminating the immediate threat, meaning the possible open invasion by the Russian state against Ukraine. So this is a very important step at the moment right now. If it's done, if Russia understands that there is no any reasonable chance to be involved openly against Ukraine with their military capabilities, there we may move forward and try to put all the potential and actual problems, contradictions onto the diplomatic map. Diplomacy should be the only one instrument to resolve the potential and future positions in order to have at least weak peace rather than the good war. There is a very understandable thesis in Ukraine that the only factor which should eliminate any further contradictions between Russia and Ukraine is the elimination of Putin's regime itself inside the Russian Federation. So as soon as we have Putin in Kremlin in charge of the Russian Federation, there will be no peace in Ukraine, unfortunately. Even if Russia is not moving forward, we will have a chaotic bandit regime in the eastern part of Ukraine on the temporarily occupied territories of Donbass. And Russia will definitely be using this particular force in order to destabilize Ukraine and keep it in a very, destructive mood, as I may say. Unfortunately, once again, I would like to repeat this thesis. Ukraine will not be able and is not capable to arrange any normal, let's say, balanced relation with the Russian Federation without any support from outside, without any support from the world capitals. And that should be clearly and very openly addressed to the Russian Federation on the one side, and to those world capitals on the other side. This is the mission of Ukraine to build and to somehow strengthen a capacity building mechanism with Western countries, with the Western allies, to make them keep going, keep supporting Ukraine in a way it should be. From that particular reason, I would like to say that there are a lot of things which Ukraine should do by itself inside its own country. So the war, the threat from the Russian Federation should not be an excuse for not making democratic reforms, for not building a strong economy, for not introducing rule of law in Ukraine. As soon as the West understand that Ukraine is doing its homework on the way to the European integration and Euro-Atlantic integration, they will give more for more. And that will definitely be a huge signal to the Russian Federation that Ukraine, no matter what it costs, is not willing to go back to the Soviet past, to the authoritarian and totalitarian past. So to be with Russia, it's a geopolitical and geographical must, and we can do nothing about that. Of course, we were doomed to stay with Russia for many centuries to come. But mentally, culturally, civilizationally, institutionally, functionally, legally, Ukraine should be part of the civilized world, should be part of the European Union, should be part of those countries, of those regions in the world who do respect democracy, rule of law, international principles, international law. Unfortunately, it's not Russia at the moment. That's why, for that particular reason, I would like to say that it's better for Ukraine to border the United States, Great Britain, which appeared to be one of the tough, one of the best, supporters at the moment for Ukraine. So it's better to border those countries mentally rather than border Russia physically, geographically. That is the main purpose of Ukraine at the moment, to prove that we are deserving this support from the side of the democratic world. If not, if Ukraine fails to do this, we'll stay one-on-one with the Russian Federation, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Glebov, Something that we're also noticing is all of this tension comes amidst a pandemic in the world. What is the COVID-19 situation in your country?
Yeah, Ukraine is part of this COVID saga, global COVID saga, of course. Now we have the attack of Omicron. I may say that for the last 2-3 weeks, Ukraine is facing a new record of those people who got COVID, whether it's Delta or Omicron. So it may sound a little bit tricky, but for the last 2 years, Ukraine, of course, like any other country in the world, faced different waves of COVID attacks. And of course, many people are being vaccinated, you know, this is the global trend. But in January 2022, we've got the highest number of those people who got COVID since the pandemic began at the late of 2019, 2020, early 2020. So I'm saying that unfortunately, we're not stepping back. We are not facing figures which are saying that the COVID-19 is giving up its positions in Ukraine. Unfortunately not. It's attacking us, and there are a lot of examples when people are being captured by COVID more than once, 2 times, even those people who got both vaccines. And it looks like this is a never-ending story. And frankly speaking, our medical system is far away from the best standards which could prevent pandemic easily. It's not easy at all. And I would like to stress out that many people died because of COVID, especially at the end of the last year. Let's hope that Omicron is not that aggressive in terms of health and life, but still it influenced badly all the economy, businesses, and people's lives as well. So I would like to say that unfortunately we're still in the middle of a big battle against COVID, and Ukraine, unfortunately, is showing is playing not good on this.
Dr. Glebov, on a final point, you are facing a multi-pronged time of tension over there. On one side, you have political security tension, you have a pandemic that is raging in Ukraine and in so many countries around the world, including here in Sri Lanka. What is your greatest fear as a Ukrainian at this moment?
Oh, at this particular moment, the main fear is the potential Russian attack. Also against Odessa from the side of the sea. And definitely, this is the main fear at the moment, where we do understand that Russia may continue, that Russia may go forward, may move forward. And all the cities in Ukraine are under a permanent and constant danger of having either airstrike or naval strike. Please do understand that we do smell and we do feel the danger of war here. And it's not by chance that many civilians are pretty much active now in joining a so-called platoons of the territorial defense. This is the mechanism which has been launched quite recently in Ukraine to mobilize people who would love to defend their own homes, own country against the external invasion. This is how we live here at the moment, and we do hope and we do pray that the worst scenarios will never take place, and the peaceful life at least in those parts of Ukraine which are under sovereign control of our official power, will never face the foreign soldier on their own soil. So this is the main fear. I believe that we still have some room for maneuver. There are a lot of evidences that Putin will probably postpone the military attack until the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing, but you never know. It's quite contradictory as to the potential terms of the possible invasion. So. Concluding, yes, this is the main fear, the fear of war. And as you know, Ukrainians do not want to go into war, but if it happens, there will be a big deal, and there will be a huge problem for those who will try to attack Ukraine.
Absolutely. And this is where tension between two countries can not only spill out onto the regional table, but can have global implications. And that is what is worrying many countries around the world, all countries actually, in terms of what is happening with regard to Ukraine, how the tension has been rising over a considerable period of time now. And we are looking for some kind of respite, taking a step back, reduction in hostility, tension, anxiety, which is something that is very much needed at this particular juncture. Thank you very much, Dr. Glebov, for taking time to speak to us on Awarelogue Alert and giving us your perception, understanding, analysis of the situation in Ukraine, international activity, what is going on the ground, and also your fears, your hopes, what could happen, what shouldn't happen. These are things that we've got to be mindful of. So thank you once again, Dr. Glebov. He is the Associate Professor and Deputy Dean of the Faculty of International Relations, Political Science and Sociology at the Odessa I, Mechnikov National University in Ukraine. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Awarelogue Alert. Join us again next time when we focus on another burning issue in global politics, in international relations around the world, right here on the Awarelogue Initiative.